The episode began like any other, with the familiar theme music echoing through the studio and the audience clapping enthusiastically. The camera panned across the hosts seated at the iconic round table, each of them smiling, greeting viewers, and exchanging light-hearted banter about trending stories. But beneath the polished surface, there was a strange undercurrent of tension, one that only those closest to the production could feel. Something was different today. The energy wasn't quite right. It was too focused, too rehearsed, and yet oddly brittle, as if everyone was bracing for an unpredictable storm. The co-hosts moved through their first segment, discussing political headlines with their usual mix of sharp commentary and sarcastic jabs. Joy Behar leaned into one of her signature jokes, prompting a chuckle from the audience, but even that felt slightly offbeat. Whoopi Goldberg, usually relaxed and commanding, was sitting more upright than usual, glancing periodically at the teleprompter and then over at the producers. Sunny Hostin's tone was unusually clipped, and Sarah Haynes tapped her fingers restlessly against her coffee mug. As the conversation wrapped up, Whoopi took a deep breath and turned to the camera. "Now, joining us today is a former White House press official and one of the youngest voices in conservative politics," she said. "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt." The audience gave polite applause as Karoline walked confidently onto the set. Dressed in a crisp blazer and heels, her demeanor was calm but assertive. She greeted each host with a handshake and a smile, and then took her seat at the end of the table. The camera tightened on her face, catching the flicker of determination in her eyes. She wasn't here to play it safe. The energy in the studio shifted palpably. Audience members who were fans of the show exchanged uncertain glances. Some leaned in, sensing that the atmosphere had thickened. Karoline adjusted her mic, smoothed the edge of her sleeve, and sat straight backed in her chair. The hosts introduced the segment as a conversation about media representation and generational perspectives in American politics. On the surface, it sounded routine, but everyone in the room could feel that this conversation wasn't going to go the way most guest segments did. As Karoline began speaking, she was respectful and poised. She talked about her experiences as a young conservative woman navigating hostile media spaces. The co-hosts nodded along, some more skeptically than others. But it was clear she was setting the stage for something deeper, something more cutting. Every word she delivered was carefully measured, building momentum with subtle intensity. The audience was silent, tuned in with a kind of quiet anticipation that only comes before a storm. Backstage, producers leaned toward their monitors, ready for anything. The silence that followed Karoline's last statement lingered, heavy and uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that rarely lasted on live television. Whoopi Goldberg blinked slowly, clearly trying to formulate a response while scanning the faces around the table. Joy Behar sat with her lips pursed, her fingers tapping against her mug, a clear sign that she was trying to restrain herself. Sunny Hostin had narrowed her eyes, and Sarah looked nervously toward the producers. But Karoline didn't flinch. Her posture was firm, her expression unyielding, and her voice when she spoke again was even more precise than before. "This show doesn't foster open dialogue," she said. "It performs it." The moment the words left her mouth, everything changed. Joy's restraint broke. She leaned forward and snapped, "You come on this show, with all your talking points, and try to paint us as villains. You don't get to waltz in here and insult what we've built." But Karoline was ready. "I'm not insulting it, Joy. I'm exposing it. There's a difference, and if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time to ask why." The room's temperature felt like it rose 10 degrees. Audience members gasped audibly, and someone in the back let out an awkward laugh, unsure whether this was scripted or a complete breakdown of the show's usual structure. Sunny jumped in, her voice sharper now. "You want to talk about discomfort? Try being a woman of color on this show, speaking truth about injustice every day and being dismissed by the very people who claim to be allies. This platform wasn't handed to us, we earned it, and we fight for it every time we speak." Karoline didn't raise her voice, but her words hit with the same force. "And yet you use it to silence people like me, young, conservative, female voices who don't subscribe to your narrative. You think your experiences give you authority to define what every woman should believe. That's not progress, that's arrogance." The camera caught the reactions in real time, hosts visibly tense, the audience frozen between gasps and murmurs. A few claps were heard, hesitant, like people weren't sure whether to support Karoline's audacity or brace for the backlash. Whoopi raised her hand, signaling everyone to calm down, but her voice betrayed a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "Karoline, you're not making a point. You're grandstanding. This show has given a platform to countless perspectives, don't come here and pretend we're shutting you down while you sit at this table. Karoline turned slightly toward Whoopi, locking eyes. With all due respect, Whoopi, being allowed to sit at the table isn't the same as being heard. I'm here today, yes. But how many people like me have been invited? How often do you allow disagreement without immediately labeling it as hate, bigotry, or ignorance? Whoopi opened her mouth to reply, but Karoline continued before she could. This show rewards the same opinions over and over again and treats opposition as poison. I'm not here to be polite. I'm here to tell you the truth. That was the moment the studio erupted. Audience members reacted audibly, some with shouts, others with applause. The control room started scrambling. The delay wasn't long enough to bleep anything, and the producers looked visibly panicked. Joy stood up halfway from her chair. Sunny threw her hands up in frustration. Sarah looked at her notecards as if they might offer an escape. Karoline, still calm, simply placed her hands back in her lap, not as a gesture of submission, but as if she had delivered what she came to say and was now daring them to respond. The View had officially lost control of the moment, and everyone watching knew it. The chaos exploded almost instantly. The second Karoline's final words hung in the air, Joy Behar pushed her chair back with a loud scrape, half rising as she pointed a finger across the table. You don't get to come in here and lecture us about truth. You're 20-something years old and you've been spoon-fed right-wing talking points your whole life. Her voice cracked from anger, her face flushed. Karoline didn't flinch, her eyes locked on Joy's, calm but blazing with defiance. The audience began to split audibly, half shouting in support of Karoline, the other half booing with increasing intensity. The studio suddenly felt like a battleground. Sunny Hostin threw up her hands, turning toward the producers. This is ridiculous. We invite guests to have real discussions, not to grandstand and insult us on live television. Sarah Haynes, who had been visibly uncomfortable the entire time, tried to say something, anything, to cool the rising temperature. Maybe we should take a break, she started, but her voice was drowned out by the growing roar of the crowd. Phones were out everywhere now, people recording what they instinctively knew would become viral within minutes. A chant began faintly from the back rows, some clapping, others shouting Karoline's name while others screamed for her to leave. Karoline turned toward Sunny, her tone colder now, more precise. You call this insulting, I call this honesty, and I think your viewers deserve honesty, even if it comes wrapped in something uncomfortable. Whoopi slammed her palm on the table, trying to re-establish order. Enough, she barked. This isn't how we do things here. You've made your point, Karoline. Loud and clear. Now let's move on before this turns into a circus. But it was already a circus. The energy was beyond salvaging. The set lights suddenly felt brighter, hotter. Everyone was speaking at once, no one was listening, and the producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras to go to commercial. But the cameras didn't cut. The feed continued live as Joy fully stood up now, arms folded, practically daring Karoline to say another word. You come on here and try to make a name for yourself at our expense. Not today, sweetheart, Joy growled. Karoline stood too, not angrily, but with a kind of deadly calm. This is exactly the problem, she said. You don't want a discussion, you want a monologue with applause breaks. The crowd lost it, shouts erupted from every corner. One audience member screamed, you tell him. While another shouted back, get her off the stage. Security staff moved in, hovering near the stage now. The show's director could be seen yelling into a headset. The hosts were on their feet, producers whispering in their ears, trying to control the moment without drawing more attention. But the spectacle had reached critical mass. The cameras tried to shift to wide angles, but the shouting couldn't be edited out. The show had lost all sense of format or structure. This was no longer a daytime talk show. It was a televised confrontation spiraling out of control, with no commercial break in sight. Audience members began standing. Some were clapping, others yelling, and a few were even crying. One woman in the front row said loudly, "This is why people don't watch anymore." Karoline didn't move. She stood in place, arms crossed, watching the unraveling calmly. It was as if she had predicted every second of this and was simply letting it play out. Whoopi, clearly fed up, turned to the crew and shouted off camera, "Cut to break. Cut it now." But before the feed could shift, the screen went black, cutting abruptly to a placeholder message, "We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by." Backstage, the atmosphere was electric and unstable. Karoline had been escorted by two producers down the narrow hallway behind the set. One of them was talking into a headset, nervously repeating, "She's secure, she's calm, were moving her to Green Room B. Karoline walked with total composure, not rattled, not flustered, almost as if the chaos she'd caused was calculated. Crew members along the way stared at her in disbelief, a few whispering to each other as she passed. Someone muttered under their breath, "She really did it." Another whispered, "They're never coming back from this." Karoline didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed ahead, sharp and focused. Meanwhile, back on the set, the hosts were trying to gather themselves. Joy had stormed off. Whoopi sat with a hand covering her face, breathing slowly through her nose. Sunny paced in circles behind the camera, furious. Sarah sat down, visibly shaken, mumbling to a producer, "We weren't ready for that." No one could have been ready for that. The audience had been hurried out of the studio in stunned silence. The control booth still buzzed with activity as executives debated whether to resume the show, run reruns, or shut down completely. "Legal's on the line," someone barked. "They want to know exactly what was said and how much went out live." One of the senior producers walked onto the stage holding a clipboard and looked directly at Whoopi. "They want to pull the segment," she said quietly. "Corporate's watching. The full clip's already on X, YouTube, TikTok, everywhere. We've lost control of the narrative." Whoopi finally looked up, her voice gravelly. "It was live. The narrative's out there. No way to bury it now." Sunny snapped, "She came here to set this up. She wanted this to happen." Sarah replied, "But we let it happen. We took the bait. Every single one of us." The words hung heavy. In Green Room B, Karoline finally sat down. A bottle of water was handed to her, which she accepted but didn't open. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications stacked on top of each other. Texts, news alerts, DMs. Headlines had already been published. Karoline Leavitt shakes up the View, unscripted meltdown on national TV, talk show turns war zone. Her team was texting one word repeatedly, viral. She looked at the screen for a moment, then turned it face down on the couch. A young assistant producer knocked on the door and peeked in. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Karoline nodded. "I said what I came to say." Back in the main studio, the cameras were finally turned off. The hosts were in a heated post-show meeting with producers and legal reps. Voices rose, hands waved, and fingers were pointed. The View wasn't just trending, it was under fire. Viewership metrics spiked higher than they had in years, but so did backlash. The studio's official inbox overflowed with praise, outrage, threats, and support. The dividing lines had never been clearer. The show had always thrived on drama, but this wasn't controlled drama, this was chaos, and it had been broadcast without filter. Karoline's name surged to the top of every social platform. Clips were being analyzed frame by frame. People praised her for standing her ground, speaking truth to power, exposing the media machine. Others condemned her for hijacking the show, disrespecting women, and spewing dangerous rhetoric. But either way, she was the center of the conversation. No PR team could have engineered this level of attention. Her voice was everywhere, and her critics were inadvertently amplifying it. In the dim quiet of the green room, Karoline leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was calculating. This was just a beginning, not the climax. One moment on one show had fractured the image of a long-running institution, and she knew exactly what she had done. She hadn't come to win an argument. She'd come to change the conversation entirely. Phones buzzed, newsrooms across the country kicked into overdrive, and editorial meetings were being called within minutes. The video of Karoline's confrontation had already been clipped, shared, subtitled, and uploaded to every major platform. Conservative media hailed her as a hero, the new face of fearless commentary. Liberal outlets scrambled to respond, some calling for boycotts, others running damage control interviews with the hosts. The View itself released a short statement, vague, corporate, and utterly inadequate for the magnitude of what had just unfolded. It read, "Today's broadcast included an unplanned exchange. We are reviewing the incident." That was all. It wasn't enough. Karoline was still in the green room. She hadn't left yet. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but now the calls were from actual numbers, names she recognized. 2 governors, a media tycoon, a political strategist who had famously backed 3 presidential campaigns. A top conservative podcast host texted, "I want you on tomorrow. Prime slot, full hour." Karoline stared at the screen for a long moment. This wasn't about what had just happened anymore. It was about what came next. She glanced at the studio door. No one had come to apologize. No one had even asked her to leave. It was as if they were afraid of even touching the storm she had created. At the View's production offices upstairs, a high-level meeting was underway. Lawyers sat next to marketing execs. The senior producer said bluntly, "We either lean into this or cancel the rest of the week." One network VP replied, "You're assuming we get a say. This has already escalated past us." HR was preparing statements. Legal was reviewing tapes. The network's board had scheduled an emergency call for the morning. One executive muttered, "We survived Rosie. We survived Megan. But this is different." Another replied, "This felt like the death of something. Like the curtain just got pulled all the way back." Social media was a war zone. Karoline's followers surged by hundreds of thousands. Old clips of her speeches resurfaced and were remixed into new content. Her quote, "Being allowed to sit at the table isn't the same as being heard," was already on t-shirts, Twitter bios, protest signs. Influencers were debating her message, using her words as battle cries or punching bags depending on their angle. Every major commentator on both sides of the aisle was either defending her or denouncing her. But no one was ignoring her. Somewhere in the city, an editorial writer hit publish on a column titled, "The Day the View Died." Another titled theirs, Karoline Leavitt, "Disruptor or Demagogue." Cable news booked full-night panels to dissect the event. Psychologists were invited to weigh in. Political analysts guessed what this might mean for the next election. A few hosts even refused to come back on air until the network made a decision about Karoline's appearance. Meanwhile, others begged producers to let them go on next, eager to step into the new cultural battlefield and ride the algorithmic wave. Karoline finally stood and looked at herself in the mirror. Her expression was unreadable, not smug, not triumphant, just quiet. She smoothed her blazer, picked up her phone, and typed a single post. When the truth disrupts the script, they call it chaos. But the audience knows better. #The View, she hit send and walked out of the room. Down the hallway, she passed a few crew members who couldn't meet her eyes. Not because of anger, because of awe, or maybe fear. One of them whispered, they might actually pull the plug. Another answered, honestly, after today, maybe they should. As Karoline exited through the rear doors, a black SUV waited for her. She got in without speaking, and it pulled away from the studio lot into the fading light of a city that hadn't yet realized what had just happened to its daily television ritual. Back inside the building, Whoopi stood alone at the edge of the stage, staring out at the now empty audience seats. She sighed, long and deep, then said quietly to herself, that might have been the last show. And for the first time in a long time, no one was sure if she was wrong.